All right, praise the Lord and good evening to everyone. Hope you can hear me. If you can't, please let me know so we can make sure we adjust everything. And let's see here, get everything set up. Let's take a few minutes to greet each other and let everyone know you're in the comment box, and we're gonna jump right into our study. Hopefully everyone's doing well. Hopefully we are coming across well. All right. All right. All right. Maybe you can hear me now. Hopefully you can hear me now. All right. All right. I think you can hear me now. Hopefully you can. If you can't, just let me know. All right. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All right. All right. I think I'm here now. All right. Good stuff. All right. So we're in here. I think the sound is coming through now. Praise the Lord, Sister Neely. Good to see you. Hey, I don't have my sidekick with me this morning or this evening. Um, we're in spring break mode now, and so we figured we'll take advantage of this week. But Lord willing, we'll be back together next week, and we'll be able to really have even more conversation and have a dialogue, and hopefully we can get this thing to work where we can invite some of you all to join us on the live stream, and I think that would be really good. But as I was saying before, hopefully you had a great Sunday. Hopefully you were able to worship well, and you got a good word that will keep you until next time we come together, and we just take every opportunity we can in this yearly Bible reading program to just join ourselves together and read and study and just make sure we're tracking along and we're encouraging one another. And so that's what this is all about. And last week, had a great time recapping. As I said, my brother Jermaine is not with me today, but we're going to hopefully next week we'll have him back and we can all get together. But we are covering this week the book of Ruth and a good bit of First Samuel. We read a great deal in First Samuel this week, and we want to kind of cover a few things. So as we move through this, I want you all to please feel free to share what you learned, what things stood out to you, what things you were picking up, and just let's just have a bit of a conversation this evening, and let's try to just share what's on our hearts. So let's talk about the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is a very powerful book. It's only 4 chapters long, but it is very, very powerful because it foreshadows the work that Jesus does, and it gives us critical information about the lineage of Jesus Christ. And that, above many other things, probably is the most important detail that we get from this book, among all the other things that are happening contextually in the world of the people that we're living in. And so when we talk about Ruth, we understand, I actually like to refer to it as a book, the book of Naomi. I know it is definitely about Ruth. And let me just say, the names and titles of the Bible are not inspired. The message is, obviously, but when I read through the book of Ruth, I just can't lose sight of the fact that it is concerned with a woman who has lost basically everything, right? And she has been gifted by God, this woman who had absolutely no reason to stay with her or stick with her, but for whatever reason, God showed him enough of himself for her to be attracted to Naomi. And it's just powerful to see how in this story, God providentially, I think is the word we want to use, he allows Naomi to be restored through the faithfulness and the kindness of this daughter-in-law of hers, who has given her more than she could have ever imagined. And so that's the big idea. Sister Neely stated, I love that Tamar and Ruth were part of the genealogy because they almost did not have a son. That's so important, and that's so good. And the fact that the Bible is so intentional about noting them in the genealogy is very impactful too. Very abnormal thing in the culture of the people we're reading about, and so that's a very important detail. Now, let's talk about the characters in the book of Ruth, because remember, we're reading this, and what we're trying to discover is the principles and the practical things that we should be learning as we read this year. So there were in the book of Ruth a few important characters. There were 7, in fact. So you had Naomi, you had Ruth, you had Boaz, you had Elimelech, you had Mahlon, Chilion, and you had Orpah, and you had Obed. All right, so these are the characters. Now, Naomi, we understand, was a very important person. Her husband dies, her sons die. We find that the book actually opens up talking about her in verse 6. And we understand this was a time during the time of the Judges as well. So that's very important. So now we understand why we're reading this in between Judges and Samuel, right? Now, this is what it says. Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed the people in Judah by giving them crops. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. From verse 6 on, I think for me, or really verse 3, that sets the tone for what this book is trying to say. And we sort of see it as a heroic thing with Ruth. But the point is, this woman just lost everything. And so she has Ruth, who is her daughter-in-law. She's a Moabite woman. And she has also Orpah, who's another daughter-in-law. And they both have a very interesting opportunity in front of them. they have an opportunity to either follow Naomi or go on with the rest of their lives and try to find a husband that will, give them children, and they go on with the rest of their lives. The more attractive option here would have been to just go on with the rest of your life and just, start over. But Ruth, which is probably why the book is named after Ruth, right? Because of her decision and her, her mindset here, stated that she will not turn back in verse 16 of chapter 1, but Naomi's people will be her people, and Naomi's God will be her God. And that line is what really, really sets the trajectory of this entire book. And so when I read about Ruth and her response, not knowing how things are going to turn out, my mindset says this woman has something else that she sees that is more valuable than what she can possibly have immediately or temporarily. She's able to grasp that there is something else to life besides the things that I possess in the immediate time. And that's a powerful way to live, because most times we're attracted by what is temporary and what is instantaneously gratifying. The things that require hard work and difficulty, and most important, the things that are spiritual and heavenly, are often least attractive to the human mind as we undergo our own plights and our own difficulties in this world. But for some reason, Ruth is able to grab hold to this idea, this concept of God that is so familiar to the Israelites, who, by the way, have been subjected to struggle, perhaps from the very moment that they were organized as a nation. And this Moabite woman, against her culture, is able to see the value in the Hebraic struggle that most Jews experience during their lifetime, right? Beautiful, beautiful thing to see. Now, the thing is that's so important here, I think, is how God providentially intervenes in this situation, not just for the sake of Naomi, who is basically a benefactor of God's providence, but for the most part, for the purpose of continuing his work and his purpose in the nation of Israel to bring about his son, who will save all nations and be the redeemer of the entire world. And so there's so much going on. And again, I often like to say, this is why we as human beings should understand that God is concerned about the everyday struggle, because our everyday struggles are contributing in a way to the thing God wants to do eternally and ultimately in the world. Like these things, we're part of that, right? And so a part of God's ultimate plan is the preservation of his people, right? So Sister Neely says, what do you think Naomi's purpose or thought was to have Ruth lay at this man's bed in the middle of the night? Yeah, absolutely. She understood the purpose. So that's a very good question. Let me just say this. The big theme in the book of Ruth is this concept called kinsman redeemer. It is a theme that is actually commanded in the writings of Moses. They were expected to take on the responsibilities of their deceased relatives, but more importantly, their deceased men of a particular family. And I think personally, whenever Naomi tells Ruth to go lay at the feet of Boaz, that's exactly what she has in mind. Now, in our Americanized idea of this, we assume that this is a romanticized, the Bible's way of giving us a romantic, story to epitomize what does it mean for us to love, our spouse or care for the one we have feelings for. But in reality, what it is a picture of how Israel provided for the needs of people in a way that was unfamiliar, firstly, to the pagans that, I say pagans respectfully, if you ever can do that, but the nations that were among them. And then two, make sure that the widows, the vulnerable are taken care of in the land. And so when we think about this act, this instruction, that's what's in her mind. She needs, just like, let me see if I can find this verse. Verse 11 in chapter 1, her mindset was like it should have been, is I can't give you all any more sons, right? I cannot give you any more sons. So if you are looking to get what every woman in your situation should be looking for, which is another son from this tribe, because the responsibility was for, if I have a, if my brother or lost his or became deceased, my responsibility as the brother was to take on the burden of the family of my brother, even meaning sometimes marrying in many instances, taking on my sister-in-law. That's kind of the way things worked in this text. So you have that responsibility. And she's saying, I don't have anyone else to give you. There are no more sons. So go on with your life. And Orpah says, all right, you're right. Actually, I'm going to do just that. But then Ruth says, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. That's not as important to me. What's important to me is that I remain with you, that I remain with your God, I remain with your people, and let the chips fall as they will. Naomi looks at this and says, well, wait a minute. There's a way out of this. There's a way to get this right. Go lay at the feet of Boaz. Now, there's been so many different ideas about what that meant, what that looked like, and what that communicated. Some that are, I'll just tell you to go do your research, and you'll see what I mean and why I won't discuss it here on this broadcast. But because the theories are there's various theories out there, and I don't want to, go into it today, at least in this way. But what you can do is you can search that, and you can see what different things. But the point is simple. The point is simply this: is that it was a way of making herself known to Boaz, who would have obviously found her to be worth his time and his energy, and then probe into the relationship that would lead to a kinsman redeeming opportunity. All right, so that's what I gather out of that. I'd love to know your all's thoughts, though. I mean, listen, you can tell me what you find and what you see there. That would be helpful and edifying to us. I was looking for, here it is. Let's see here. If you look at Leviticus chapter 25, that's one idea of how a kinsman would intervene in the responsibilities of a person. And this was one of the examples in which family members would take care of the debts and things of that nature of other family members. And let's see here. Yeah, Leviticus chapter 25. And let me just see if I can read here. Yeah. If you read Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23, then throughout the remainder of the chapter, you'll see how this all works out. What were the expectations? It includes debt, property, all these different things. We saw that in the book of Ruth become an issue, which is why the one kinsman who was closest to Naomi declined, because he didn't want to forfeit his family's line and their inheritance. Okay. Now, the book of Ruth then demonstrates to us how Jesus redeems us. He comes and he takes our load. He gives us this opportunity to be saved, opportunity to be a part of the family, and from there we're able to go and live in harmony with our Savior. This is the picture, the overall picture that the book of Ruth is trying to demonstrate. But the thing is this is expected of Israelites in a very practical and everyday way. And so as people of principle, reading the Bible, we should in some way try to find out, how does this work out in our own communities? That's the hard part. How do we assist one another? I think a lot of times whenever we think about, our communal responsibility as a church, we take passages like Acts chapter 2, save yourself from this untoward generation, in a way that was not intended by the original author. Like save yourself means be concerned about yourself. Don't worry about anybody else. But what we discover is that the first believers had this very huge commitment to one another, that while they were yet saving themselves, they were concerned about the needs of other people. You see this all in Acts chapter 4. You see it also in Acts chapter 2, where they understood that they had a responsibility to one another. And these are the sort of things we find in the book of Ruth as well. All right, well, listen, things work out. Boaz ends up doing the honorable thing, redeeming the fields, okay? The family of Naomi, marrying her, protecting Ruth, taking care of Naomi, and then having a child, which is the ultimate plan and hopes of this sort of redemption. Turns out that the person that is born to Ruth and Boaz is a man by the name of Obed. And just for sake of conversation, who was Obed? Someone put it in the comment box. Tell me who was Obed and who was his descendant, most famous descendant. Who was Obed and who was his most famous descendant? Somebody just throw it in the comment box. We understand that, and the way that this is included in the book of Ruth is so strategic and intentional as to tell us, listen, there's a bigger point to this whole thing. The way it is included in the story, it actually shows us that the writer was intentionally writing in hindsight, like, pointing back to say, hey guys, in fact, it has to be argued that this was written in a time where one should have been paying attention to the times they're living in as to track the ancestry of one of the most famous and relevant individuals of the time in which this book was probably being written. And that's right, it's Jesse, which gives us the son David. So you can imagine, as David is being king, or maybe ruling, if you will, this book is being written recounting the history of Israel and one of its greatest kings, and it wants to tell us, hold on a second, do you want to know where and how we got to David? Well, let me tell you this story about this woman named Ruth and how she was able to be used by God to get us to the point where we have a David. And he goes through this brilliant story. This is how history is being recounted here, and it shows just how important it is to the nation of Israel to know these sorts of origin stories and know how the ancestry is actually being tracked. It goes further even to say how intentional God is and how involved God is in our everyday life. God is absolutely concerned about what's happening, and even though it doesn't feel like it at times, he is intricately involved in everyday situations. I say this all the time because it's so important. It's so true. Even down to the situation where this old woman who has lost her sons, has 2 daughter-in-laws, decides she wants to go back to a land and find food in the middle of a very terrible situation. God is all in all of that. He's there. He's present. And so as an Israelite hearing this, wondering what is going to happen after having a time like Saul or having a situation like Goliath, you're thinking to yourself, where's God? And this story reminds them he's here. He's in it. He's in it all. All right. So processing all that was very, very beautiful. The book of Ruth is a short book, but it's very powerful. After Ruth, then we get to go into what I like to consider to be the book that sets us up to see the evolution of Israel into an established nation. Because if Judges was the time where we were in this kind of intermediate, or what I should say, what is that word they use in drama? What is it called? Whatever. Anyway, and we were in this break between Judges and Kings. That's what the book of Ruth is for me. That's what the book of Judges is, as we get from the wilderness to actually becoming a monarch. Then we're able to see in 1 Samuel that, okay, this nation is about to fully be established in a way that is very common in the world that they're living in. And the only thing that's missing from them to do this is a king. They need intermission. Thank you so much. There you go. Jesse's father. I see everybody's comments. Thank you. An intermission. We have a bit of an intermission. Praise the Lord, Elder Smith. Good to see you. Thank you for blessing me this morning too, and that was right on time. Can't thank you enough for that. Um, but when we think about what's going on here in the book of Ruth, excuse me, First Samuel, we're able to see the pains and the complications that this nation is facing as they go through finding out who they are, finding out what their identity is supposed to be in a land that looks altogether different from what they're used to seeing in the wilderness. And so it starts off with a beautiful, oh my goodness. I wish I had Jermaine here to talk about this because I really would love to have some conversation around this. But it starts off in First Samuel, again, with an everyday situation, with an everyday problem, which demonstrates how God gets involved with the things we face every single day. Starts off with the story with Hannah. We all know it. We've heard it many, many times before. What we don't know, or often process, should I say, is how Hannah is actually, and her situation, her barrenness, is actually the thing in which God will use to move in Israel in a way that will literally change the entire trajectory of their entire existence. Her prayer is not just a prayer for her, it is essentially a prayer for Israel. And that is such a beautiful thing to think about. And may our prayers do the same thing. May our prayers put us in a position where it not only blesses us, but it blesses those individuals in whom we are connected to and those communities in which we belong. May the things God do for us individually bless the people around us collectively. And so whenever she prays for a son, notice what happens. She prays for a son, and then she makes a vow. She says, Lord, I need you to give me a son. I'm tired of being barren. I would love a child. And the child that you give me, I'm going to give back to you. Now, what she didn't know there is that the child that she gives back to God is going to be the child that will literally lead Israel through one of its most hostile circumstances to this point, as it tries to discover how to establish itself in this land. So what does God do? God gives Hannah her son, and it comes at perfect timing because there's a priest there who had two sons, Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas. And the text says that these gentlemen were not the kind of priest that you would want. Just to be honest, they were not at all what you'd want to see in the tabernacle. They're not doing things that are helpful. In fact, in chapter 2, you'll see my translation, the New Living Translation, describes them as scoundrels, and it says they had no respect for the Lord or their duties as priests. I'm not going to get in that vein. I can go into that. Don't want to do it because I don't want to get caught up here tonight. I think y'all understand it. Y'all get the point. These guys were up to no good, and they did things that were up to no good. Meanwhile, cutscene, go to the other part of the story. There's a woman over here who doesn't have a child, and she's praying for one, and she said, Lord, I'll give you what you give me. Then you go back to the other side of the script, and you see that there are two sons over there cutting up and not acting the way they need to act. And they're causing problems. And so you can see all of this happening. And there is so much that just works together. It's that Romans 8 thing. All the things are working together for the good of the Lord, right? And he's accomplishing his purpose. So here it is. The son is born. The Lord calls Samuel. And then God begins to deal with Eli. And in chapter 3, as his sons are removed and as he is no longer, the entire family rather, is no longer appropriate for God's use in the tabernacle, God begins to use Samuel. And he serves in the Lord's house. And then it's on from there. Now we have this battle between the Philistines and the Israelites for chapters and chapters and chapters. Really, this is the whole story of David and Saul. They're fighting the Philistines. They are a thorn in their flesh. Or in the nation, should I say. And they're causing many problems. So Jermaine says, did Hannah commit to the Nazirite vow as she didn't cut Samuel's hair and dedicate him to serving with the priest. I think there's something to be said about that, Jermaine. I think there's some sort of resemblance to the Nazarite vow in the life of Samuel. And it appears that if it wasn't a Nazarite vow, there was some sort of vow that she committed him to, which he embraced and lived in his entire life. And so, very good observation. I don't know that it was. I know my translation. I don't think other translations mentioned it this way either. But I know, as far as I remember, my translation did not include a Nazarite vow explicitly, and I don't see where others did either to Samuel. But there was something there. She committed him. She definitely dedicated him. I think the word might be she dedicated him, and he at the wise counsel of Eli, I must give it to him. He embraced the Lord's voice in his life, and he did what was necessary. Now, the thing that's interesting about this whole story is how Israel begins to beg the Lord for a king, even with all of the things that he says will happen. They're kind of like, we know what's going to happen, we know what we should expect, but we want one anyway. And Samuel is distraught by this because he knows what this means. He knows what this is going to do to the nation. And the thing that the Lord says to him is alarming. And he says this often whenever Samuel is lamenting over this. He says, give them what they want, because they are not rejecting you. They are rejecting me. They don't want me to be their king any longer. And so when they ask for a king and they do it saying, give us a king to judge us like the other nations have, they're saying, we see what they have and we want that. What God was saying to them is, you're not supposed to be like that. You're supposed to see me in that position, and you're supposed to follow me from that regard, right? So when we see this, it is a huge jab at God, and obviously it's going to be the thing that leads Israel down a path of idolatry forever. They're going to struggle with this decision, as God said they would in the books of Moses. Now, Sister Neely referenced 1 Samuel 1:11. I think that she was going back and saying that this was the dedication. I think it was more of a dedication. Very good point, Sister Neely. I think it was a dedication there more than it was more than a Nazarite vow. Obviously, it's a form of a vow. I just don't know that, because the text doesn't say Nazarite. I don't know that Samuel would have considered himself a Nazarite as much as he would have considered a man dedicated to God from his birth, right? So I'm just kind of careful to go only as far as the text will allow me. All right. All right. So Israel requests their king, and Samuel tries to warn them against it. He tells them all the pros and cons. They still want it. And then ironically, God sends him to anoint a man like Saul, which is interesting. Like, I often think about, why would God have him anoint Saul? Like, why not David first, right? God gives them a Saul before he gives them a David. And I have to believe that in God's selection of whoever was selected, he was wise enough to see that the person that he selected would fit the description of what he gave them concerning their activity. I think what I mean by that is, when God tells Samuel to anoint Saul, right, who is, by the way, like Sister Neely notes, is described as being tall and handsome, but he's also described as being the descendant of a wealthy and influential man. He's one that stands head and shoulders above all the other people. The description of him does not seem to be one that communicates spirituality, godliness, character. It's all the things that you would typically look for in a leader, but may not necessarily be good for the people being led. It's kind of like today. I think about this all the time. When we as people look for leaders, we often look for characteristics that are harmful to us rather than helpful, right? Because most times we gauge what we want in a leader by what we can see. right? How do they look? Different things. You all get what I'm saying. And when I look at how Saul was selected, I consider the selection of Saul being purely a uh, a selection based on things that probably were not necessarily relevant to his ability to carry out the position in a way that God commanded in the first place. And the reason I say that is because when God chooses David to be anointed, notice what he says. He chooses David, says, give me David, not his brothers, because man looks at the outward, the things that you see outwardly, but God looks at that which is inside the heart. God looks at the inward. So you can see the dichotomy between the selection of Saul and the selection of David, which I think is intentional. Even though God tells him to anoint Saul, it seems very, very clear that God is trying to prove a point. He's trying to demonstrate something by selecting Saul. I'm not saying that God chose Saul to fail. I'm trying to say that God knew what was going to happen before he did everything he did. And that was the point. He's anointed. He has a chance, but God knows what's there. And he's going to use him to demonstrate what he has been saying all along through Samuel. It makes me wonder, brothers and sisters, what we have going on whenever we do certain things like elect a presidential candidate or select a new pastor or, select a new CEO of a company. I think sometimes we don't even see God at work in those kinds of things. We don't think about the warnings and the word of God that describes to us what we should be doing and what our participation in that thing should be. And sometimes what God does is, Sister Nelly says, is he gives us what we want to show us what we really need. I'm going to say that one more time because that just hit me right here. Sometimes God gives us what we want to show us what we really need. And I think this is just me processing as a reader with you, my brother and sister, throughout our reading this week. When I read about Saul, it is what I perceive to be God giving them what they want so they can see finally that David, the kind of king that David was, is what they needed, right? And so we'll go through that as we begin to read through David's life, and we'll see the difference. A good study for anybody to participate in is the differences between a David and a Saul, and just see what was there. Definitely David was no perfect king, but there are some unique differences there that made him the king that everyone wanted to be, and I think that's worth studying. Okay, so we have Saul. We talked a bit about David. It's hard to read in the book of Samuel and not talk about David. But then you also had Jonathan, right? Jonathan was Saul's son. And catch this, guys. In their mind, in everybody's mind, if Saul is king, the next one to be king after him would have been Jonathan. It is ironic that Jonathan and David had such a close relationship, and Jonathan had the wherewithal to submit himself, if even in times, to what God was doing in the life of David. I think sometimes we don't pay attention to that. I think sometimes we run over that fact that Jonathan is never seen trying to impose his right to the throne. He seems to accept the sovereignty of God to take the throne away from his father's house. He lives in this almost brotherly like friendship with David, and submitting to him in that way, and God is able to, I think, in ways, bless Jonathan. We saw in a situation where Jonathan life was on the line and the people stood up to him. There's all sorts of things we can pull from that to show how God was intervening in that situation. All right, now here we find, as we read on this week, we got to chapter. Let's see here. We got all the way to chapter. I won't go that far yet. There's so much that happened in between there. Before we get there, let's talk about Saul's disobedience. All right. So Saul is a very okay. So at first, and this is the thing that's interesting. At first, Saul is a humble, timid self-aware king, right? When God calls him to anoint him, he says, listen, who am I? My tribe is the least of all tribes. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. Why would you choose a person like me? When it's time for him to be announced and proclaimed, he's hiding among baggage. No one can find him. He has the proper demeanor, if you will. He understands his worthlessness. I can say that way. Then he becomes king, and it's so amazing what a title and what authority can do to a person. Titles and authority has the ability to corrode the hearts and the intentions of some of the most righteous, if you will, some of the most innocent people. It's dangerous in the hands of the wrong people. And I would perceive Saul to have been a person who could not handle the title and the authority that God gave him, and he mismanaged the opportunity. So what happens? Here he is, he's king. And he begins to prophesy, which comes across, Sister Neely, I think you made a point of this in one of your comments this week. It comes across as an erratic expression. Like he's just like, what is that called? Ecstatic, not erratic. I'm sorry, I don't know what erratic is. Ecstatic expression, where he's like very demonstrative. There's these expressions coming out of a person, which is typical in the Old Testament school of the prophets, which was a real thing. Prophets often came together in schools. You had Elijah, which we'll read about later. Prophets there were schools of prophets. So based on Old Testament understanding, prophets had a certain demeanor, which was ecstatic. And I want to say this too. In the Western world in the 21st century, the idea of visions and transcendent experiences, they're very foreign. If you read the Bible, you understand that that's not a foreign thing at all. Things like visions, trances, supernatural visitations were the norm for them. And so in the school of the prophets, these things happen regularly, but it was only expected to happen among the prophets and not just your everyday people, not even a king. This is why a king needed a prophet, right? And so when Saul gets there and he's behaving in the way that he's behaving, he's speaking with the prophets, he's having these expressions, he's prophesying. They see it as a very abnormal, a very not so common thing, and they actually make mention of it. Okay. Shavanique says, and man, that's why Saul was selected, because they wanted him and David was who they needed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so good. And we'll see that over and over again. Now, whenever, let's see, Brother Jermaine says Saul was very impulsive and would often move on how he felt before waiting for God. That's good. David consulted God in every situation, every decision, even when he was in distress, and even when he was blessed, whenever God blessed him. That's good. All that's good. Yeah, absolutely. Very good observations. All right, so speaking to that point, Saul gets his opportunity to exercise his first duties as king, right? And he fights with the Ammonites, and he's very successful. I mean, he obviously knows how to fight. He appears to be a very warrior-like figure, and he's able to defeat armies and people whenever he go out to fight them. Very, very good thing as a king. But the problem is he would act presumptuously. And like you all are saying, he would not act in obedience to what God was saying. And probably the unfortunate thing for him is that God allowed him to catch this, God allowed him to be victorious while being disobedient. And I think, man, that's a killer for us. Just because we're winning, it doesn't mean that we are in good favor with God. And it doesn't mean that we are on the Lord's side. Here we have, in the case of Saul, while he is disobedient to God, God allows him to win, which is the worst thing for him, because it would have been better for him to lose and have a possibility or an opportunity to repent, rather than winning and not seeing what he's doing to himself as he disobeys God and get all of these victories. It's one of the worst things. So he's winning against the enemy, but he's losing with God. right? He's winning with the Ammonites, but he's losing with God. He's winning with the Philistines, but he's losing with God. And that's a very unfortunate thing for him, because um, that's going to be his downfall. Now Samuel on the other side is over here. He's just hurt by all of this, and you can tell that Samuel was one who really cared about Israel, and he could really see, as the text would refer to him as a seer. The prophets were seen as seers. He could really see where this was going, and he would often lament. But this is, I love the way chapter 12 ended. He said, "I'm going to continue to pray for you guys. I'm going to teach you what is good. I'm going to teach you to fear the Lord and be faithful to Him." And he's going to stick in there with them in that regard. But then he gives them this warning in verse 25 of chapter 12. If you continue to do what you're doing, you and your king, you're going to all be swept away. And that's essentially what's happening here. They are preparing to be swept away. Now, I want us to pay attention to this, because what we're dealing with is the start of a habitual act of all of Israel's kings. All of the kings, for the most part, seemingly embody what Saul does in one form or fashion. Okay, and that's what offends God the most. All right. So let's see here. Chapter 13, they're warring against the Philistines. It's the first time in the biblical narrative where Samuel proclaims that the Lord is going to take away the kingdom from him, and that's a real thing. Think about that as being because the kingdom doesn't just belong to one person; it belongs to their family. So this kingdom no longer belongs to the house of Saul. It's going to go to someone else whom the Lord has designated. God doesn't tell him who this person is at this point, but he will surely find out. Now here's the thing that's funny. The person whom God says he has already selected in chapter 13 is the very same person that God will use to bring Saul victory. Right? So the text says in chapter 13, I already selected who I'm going to replace you with, but I'm not going to let you know that yet. And in fact, God doesn't it's not made known until chapter 16. Okay? He's anointed king. And it's so funny to me how David just slithers into the company of the nation of Israel, particularly the service of Saul, knowing that he's been anointed to be king. In my mind, I'm thinking, is it possible that David, knowing what his future entailed, was in some way trying to serve as a student, right? Under Saul, to get a purview of what it would be like to be king? It's just me thinking. I'm not saying this is what was happening. I'm just thinking out loud with you guys, because you guys are my friends and we're studying the Bible together, all right? But there had to be, like, how do you know that you're going to be king and you accidentally walk into the service of the king, of the current king? What's going on there? There's something to be said about that, all right? But anyway, so here he's told that he's going to have the kingdom taken away from him in chapter 13. By the time we get to chapter 15, the rejection of Saul that God has is even more apparent, because he willingly disobeys the Lord. He blatantly disobeys the Lord. He lies about it. He tries to cover it up. And the Lord reminds him that this kingdom is surely taken away from you. You don't know how to obey me. And what he means by that, when he says you don't know how to obey me, what he means is you try to worship me your own way. Okay? You try to give me worship in the way that you think is best and useful. You don't pay any respect to the fact that I have given you parameters and rules and guidelines and instructions on how you should worship me. No, you try to do it your own way. And so for that reason, I'm going to give you this lesson that will reach the entire world. Obedience is better than sacrifice. It's better for you to obey me than to try to worship me your own way. And so we see this is kind of I saw that as kind of like the nail in the coffin, if you will. This is the end. This is the end for Saul. And perhaps we could say it's the beginning of his torment, because from this point on in chapter 15 and chapter 16, we're going to see David really comes onto the scene. He's anointed king in chapter 16, and then he has that most famous battle with Goliath that puts him on the map and starts the dramatic relationship, the contentious relationship between him and Saul that will last for the rest of this book. It's going to keep on going. Well, I won't say the rest of this book. It's going to keep on going for a few chapters until chapter 25. And then after that, David will be fully launched into his reign, if you will, defeating different people. But this is it reminds me of in some ways of storylines that you would find in Hollywood. You couldn't write a better storyline than what we're reading right now. The drama, the activity, the anticipation of what's going to happen. What we're going to read this week and what we began reading today is, what does it look like to be truly anointed? Catch this, for the right reason. Okay, what does it mean to be anointed for the right reason? What does it mean to live in that anointing? And what does it mean to respect? Catch this. This is so hard. To respect those whom God has his hand on, but he's not using, and living your purpose and in your calling. There's so many lessons to learn from, oh my goodness, from the story of David and Saul. And so, while we could have a conversation about it, obviously we can talk about it. I would love to hear what you guys say. So listen, make sure as you're going through the YouVersion Bible app, drop your comments there, leave your notes in the YouTube videos and things of that nature, and keep a good journal of this, because I believe, brothers and sisters, you will need this at some point in your life. If you have not already, if you don't need it now, you will need it at some point. You're going to have to learn how to submit yourself to people who has been anointed for a particular role and position, but God has refused to use any longer. And you're going to have to maintain your integrity. You're going to have to maintain your patience as God develops you for the moment that he's called you to live in. And you're going to have to figure out how to maintain your integrity. And we learn all of that from David and Saul. All right, so listen. Thank you, guys. So let's keep on studying, all right? Let's keep on studying. I missed my sidekick, Jermaine. We're going to have to get back on it next week. I wish we could have really jumped in this, but next week is going to be good, too. So we'll jump in it next week, and we'll discover some things that we can learn from this great story that we're reading. But listen, thank you all so much for hanging out with me for this past hour. We're going to continue to read, study, and grow together, and we're going to live by what we're reading. But until next time, take care. God bless. Remember, live by the word.